dive into all things mindfulness and mental performance as it relates to youth sports. Today, my guest is Dr. Cassidy Preston. Cassidy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Todd. Excited to be
It's
here.
uh, it's awesome. It's awesome to have you. I've been spending a couple of weeks delving into your book and reading a bunch of the tips. So I'm looking forward to kind of flushing that out. But before we get started, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your story and how did you find yourself in this, role or world?
Yeah, so my background's in hockey. That's what I grew up playing, North Bay, Ontario. Loved play on the outdoor rinks. Wanted to get to the NHL and climb the ranks, get to the OHL, and then things start to fall apart a bit. My mindset, I'm getting in my own head. I'm so obsessed with the results. It's like weighs on me, right? And for a lot of players that climb the ranks, I lost touch with the love of the game. And so I started to really understand and appreciate the mental game. And I was like, hey, well, what is it? How can I work on it? I started doing this work, and it probably took me 9 years to really kind of get a good grasp. And that by the end of my career, a little bit of pro and then playing university hockey, I'm like, okay, I've got a good idea. Do some more education. Like I'm just like I call myself sometimes like a mad scientist. I'm like, there's got to be a better way. Like, how can we streamline it? How can we make it effective? And athletes, like, hey, how can they shift their mindset so they can be more consistent? And so it's been about 20 years in the making now, and then which led me to do my PhD, now doing the work that I do now, and which led to the book. But it stems from the pain when I was 15, 16, 17, and struggling with my own mindset as I was trying to climb the ranks. And that was kind of the origin of my passion for this work.
Sure. I mean, I think that, part of the impetus for this was, I've got a young athlete in the household and that's something that was interesting, but we also billeted OHL players.
Yeah.
And I saw that firsthand, the roller coaster of these guys. And I've talked about it with other people, but it was one of those things that I said, man, we're spending a fortune on ice time and skills and dry land, and nobody's worrying about other parts of the other parts of the game or the other things that maybe you could take control of. So that's really what spawned this and saying, hey, if we can reach out and help, one person or two people, change their thought process about how they're going things. So that's kind of how we got here. So not
Yeah.
sure if this will be a controversial question, but for years, people have been preaching about goal setting.
Mm.
And, as I'm reading your book, why don't you tell us a little bit why you believe this is I'll call it a failed approach. I think those are my words, but,
Yeah. Yeah.
tell
Yeah.
me a little bit about that.
So I like to challenge a lot of like traditional thinking. It's like, well, why do we do things the way we do it? And in the sports psych literature and the general practices, there's definitely some helpful things. And they're not all like not helpful, but we want to be mindful about why we're doing things. And really what is the strategies that are gonna have the best impact? And one that's overused, over talked about is goal setting. And everyone's like, Got to work on your mind. You got to have more goals. Set your goals. Write down your goals. Like, be smart about them. Be specific and measurable and accurate. It's like, and there's nothing wrong inherently with goal setting. So it's not inherently bad or a failed approach. There's just a major caveat to it. If that's your main strategy and all you do, you're obsessing about the external things, the results. You can do some goal
Right.
setting around your process as well. And we call it creating your personal scorecard with your own definition of success versus the external scorecard and personal or the external results and goals. And so, again, the more people kind of get caught up into it, and then things kind of weigh on them, and it can create all this noise and weight, and it actually becomes a major distraction. So I've very little, if rarely, been like, all right, let's sit down and really clarify and overly just talk about I know what everyone's goals are. Get to the next level, produce more. Like
Sure.
that's always the goal. I need to have a general idea of the scope, especially when I start with somebody. Like, hey, well, is it like the NHL? Is it here? Like, what is the general external drive and scope that you have? But then it's like, okay, we got that. Now let's focus on who you want to be and how you want to show up and your mindset and your mental state, and more of an inside out approach versus, oh, let's get the end goal in mind and reverse engineer and how to get there. And but everything's about the goal. It's like, yeah, okay. the goal is the external thing, but what's the internal process and mental state, and actually prioritize that. So yeah, that's just short of it. So yes, I am generally against goal setting as a go-to main strategy for your mindset. Goal setting isn't inherently bad. You need guardrails and feedback mechanisms, but the type and how you do it matters. And I wouldn't make it your priority if you're trying to play with more confidence and focus and composure and resilience. It doesn't. There's not a high correlation with that from versus the other strategies that I do use. So yeah.
Fair enough. I mean, you know what? It's interesting. I can, I've got 4 kids, and with the youngest is he was starting off to play hockey. I noticed language when you'd be talking to people, and they go, "Oh, you play hockey? Well, you had a game today. Did you score a goal?"
Mm,
And I'd always like cringe. I was like, don't ask a kid that. Hey, did you have fun?
yeah.
It's always like, what happens if you're a defenseman and
Yeah.
you don't score goals, you just stop goals. Like there's
Yeah.
more to it than just those. And yeah, for some people there's different outcomes that you want to have, but and there's kids that, I know we live in the Port Credit area, and they have a paperweights program. So it's
Mm,
4 to 6 year olds. It's really well run by a guy named Tom Fatsis. He's not only is he the coordinator of the whole program, he on ice referees every game every Saturday. So
nice.
all the teams, there's 6 games, he's on the ice the whole time.
Wow.
um, the kids play against their own skill level regardless of age. So if you're a great skating 4 year old, you'll play against the great skating 6 year olds. It's really
Yeah.
well curated. But what's
Yeah.
cool is near the end of the year, he knows what kids haven't scored a goal,
Mm.
and he literally sets up penalty shots and opportunities in the games. And I've seen him go down to goalies and go, hey, can you just go to the left and leave the net open? Right. And the kid comes down and then
Yeah.
makes a little deke, and the goalie slides the other way, and the kid scores. And just, the elation, just to give them that feeling of what that's like, because so many people put a focus on that outcome, right? As opposed to, did you really love hockey? Did you have a great time playing, right? And there's that inherent thing. I don't know if it's just that sport. I think it's probably any sport, Did you
Yeah.
play baseball? Did you get a hit?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. My son played a doubleheader last weekend. First game, 4 at bats, 4 walks. Didn't didn't even get a hittable pitch, right? And people are
Yeah.
like, that sucks. And I go, well, he was on base all time. Like his coach was
Yeah.
happy with that,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's a totally different thing. So one of the things that I'm kind of thinking about as well is that stuck out for me in the book is you talk about the alter ego, sorry. And
Yeah.
how, how do you describe the process for a player to kind of start to build that for themselves, and what that means, between, I'm assuming obviously who they are on the field of play, who they are
Yeah.
off the field of play, but how do you talk them through that and have them build that for themselves, and what's the benefit?
Yeah, so there's a lot behind that. And my mentor is Todd Herman, who wrote the book, The Alter Ego Effect. And he's the guy that worked with Kobe to create the Black Mamba, which is pretty
Okay.
much the most legendary mindset in all of sports. And
Yep.
so, there's lots to unpack when we're thinking alter egos. And on one side, what I first like to explain is like the name is always weird, like alter ego. It's like the way I like to just frame it is like, who do you want to be and how do you want to show up in this field of play, right? When you're on the ice, when you're on the pitch, when you're on the field, and how do you not? And that clarity and contrast about how you want to show up, like your mindset, who you want to be, you have clarity on that, well, then everything flows from there. And so, but a lot of people, like all the pro athletes come in and they'll be like, I'm not sure who I want to be out there. I'm like, what? Like, if you don't have clarity and certainty and how you want to show up, not what you want to achieve, and even not even just what you want to do. Do's matter. Results, pretty obvious, score, etc. The do does matter, but who are you being? How does it feel to be out
Right.
there? And that's what ties into the do, which leads to the results. And so the alter ego is an identity, it's a traits, and it's clarity in that. And then when you create a name and a story to it, that makes it personalized versus just, okay, as an athlete, you want to go and be confident and resilient and focused. Like, so does everybody. like that's kind of vague. And it's helpful to like focus on that to a degree. And we can debunk the whole word confidence, which is a whole second, maybe different discussion after. But the premise being like, what does that feel like? And like, think of like traits like attack mode, for a lot of athletes. Whereas like you might not be in attack mode when you're playing with your friends or family at home, and you're more in like playful and respectful. It's not that you're disrespectful on the field of play, but you're definitely in attack, and you're not playing safe or scared or overly worried about the opponent's feelings. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've got talk about scoring and stuff. My daughters they're going to be 6 and 4 this year soon, and so they're doing like little pickup soccer. And it's like, oh, did you score? It's like, oh, no, like, who are they being out there? And we're just trying to teach them to like battle, because we're generally teaching them not to battle. And I was like, they're just letting people take the ball
Right.
from them. They're like, go ahead. Like, it's like they don't have that. We got to cultivate that. Like, who do you want to be? And like, this is allowed and encouraged, and doing it without,
Yes. Are you're allowed to be the daisy picker out there,
yeah,
or sit on the grass, and then yeah,
yeah,
I know.
yeah. So it's letting them evolve and go through it. But so then the process of doing it with an athlete is, one, getting clarity of like, what are the key moments? What are the key traits, and how do they want to show up, and how do they not? But then the really cool part is creating the story or narrative. So it can be somebody that inspires them. It can be an animal. It can be another athlete. It can be a movie character, or a superhero, whatever it is. It then, creates this little nickname or name, and they identify with us like, oh, flip that switch. It's time to get into this mode. It's attack mode. It's,
Right.
be the shark out there, or the lion, or the, superhero like Batman time, or whatever it is. And also, even having a name for the other can be actually really helpful. And the name can also just be like, courageous Cassidy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it should be like a little nickname. It's like, that's the time to go and like, just attack, and trust, and put myself out there versus play reserved. And but it should click. And again, and I'll do this exercise with people, and they don't have to have a super cool name. It's encouraged, but like, I don't put the pressure on it that it needs to. It's more about going through and getting the clarity goes a long way, thinking about stories, and being able to, like, I call it also like getting a player's DNA. Like, who are you being? Like, it's your DNA now that you tap into. And the more we circumvent, like more we circle around and have discussions and clarify what it is and what it isn't, what it feels like, that goes a long way. And I can give lots of kind of other cool examples, but yeah, that'd be the gist of it, right there. And it's a very powerful exercise that plays more on identity, playfulness, creation, imagination, versus like, well, let's do some goal setting and some thought stopping and some other things that aren't inherently bad, but I find not as impactful. If that makes sense. And we also use
Yeah,
reset
no,
routines like acceptance, commitment. So yeah, that's the quick intro to the alter ego.
yeah, it does, because I can remember even a couple of years ago, my son playing elite baseball. That his program was like, okay, set your goals, and it's like, okay, I want to have exit velo and all these, and it was kind of like, okay, what does that matter about,
Mm-hmm.
because baseball, all sports are there are mental components, but baseball is one where you have too much time to think,
Oh,
and
tons.
you're constantly thinking about, okay, there's a guy on a base, and if the ball's hit to me, where am I going with it? All these, like, there's so many thoughts, and then how do you not let all the negativity, you know, go in, and then reaction, because you can't control where the ball goes, and you're reacting to, like, there's so much going on.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's an incredible mental sport, but I found the goals, like I was reading them and I'm going like, I don't know how you, like, okay, you might achieve these, but does that make you a better player? Or,
Yeah.
I don't really know. I think, not that they were not well meaning in trying to do that, but the more that I delve into this and talk to other people, it does seem like there are other things that kids could be focusing on, and kind
Yeah.
of in going along that way. So
Yeah.
pivot a little bit. We both share, I think, similar opinions when it comes to coaching feedback. And
Mm.
what I'll say, my hypothesis is, these kids start playing a sport. So your daughter started playing soccer, and they're just out for a lark, and they're kicking a ball around, and they're doing whatever they're doing. And in a couple of years, maybe, geez, they really like soccer, and maybe, oh, they're really good at it. And we want to play a higher level soccer. And then you start to play a higher level, and then all of a sudden I see, you know, players coming into contact with coaches that it's their business
Mm,
to have you in that sport,
yeah.
and that it isn't necessarily very servant led.
Mm,
It's very much the players serving them, and
yeah.
that can create a lot of negative feedback, disrespectful conduct by the
Yeah.
coaches. And I'm not saying all are bad, but boy, if you live in the southern Ontario region and you play in one of the bigger, we'll call them the biggest hockey league in the
Hmm.
world, I think they call themselves.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressure on winning,
Yeah.
and and the pressure on the kids. And I say they make this transition from playing for fun to
Yeah.
now it becomes a business. And I mean, you touched on it about how get back to the kind of the fun of the game, but
Yeah.
how do you suggest an athlete who's out there listening to this, who maybe is in a toxic, might be a little too strong a word, but potentially a somewhat toxic environment, and
Yeah.
how can they deal with that, and how can something like mindfulness and this whole process help them move through that and be the best version of themselves?
Yeah. Great discussion. I think first on a high level, I feel, and from what I see, toxic coaching, just to use it as a term, and old
Sure.
school coaching, um, is it's getting better. Meaning it's becoming less frequent. It's still very pervasive in different areas and different levels. Junior hockey as an example. There's still tons of it at different levels in junior hockey. There's lots of it not, and like a lot of coaches, like you'll see coaches in the NHL at the highest levels becoming way less. Like you can't do it in the NHL now. Like you're on such a microscope. Like it's just, and you're not going to get the buy-in from those kind of players. And you see like even someone like Tortorella has changed his approach to coaching and
Certainly.
being less toxic. And not that he was intentionally toxic before, but he just did some old school stuff. Like, and he's doing less of it from at least an outsider's perspective. But even just talking with some of my clients, there's definitely a lot of changes. Now, there's still lots of room to still grow and a long way to go. Some of the ways for parents and athletes to navigate that is, first and foremost, I always give the choice piece, meaning, and because I deal with this all the time, and my company and sees it all the time. Someone coming in, my coach, and we're like, okay. So one of the first things is like, I'll be like, I say this a lot. I'm like, well, your coach is an idiot. Like, not disrespectfully, but like what he's doing isn't right. It's not optimal. You don't want to treat players this way, athletes, people this way. It's not optimal. Maybe that's how he or she was coached and brought up, and it's what they know, and they're trying to do their best. Coaching isn't inherently easy. It can be quite difficult when there's all these expectations and weight on them, and then the players and parents, there's all this noise.
Sure.
So nonetheless, but I like to frame, like, give them the empathy and be like, yeah, like, you're in, like, this is wrong in a way, this is not optimal, and therefore you have the right, what are your options, how do you want to now process this? Like, you could go, you know to the media if you want, like, you could, like, what route do you want to go, like, go to the organization, and a lot of, so it's like, speak up, right? It's like, speak up and out against it,
Sure.
like, call it out, call it for what it is. Generally, athletes aren't really doing that because the process and the trust within that is just too much. Oh, I might get blackballed if I do that. If I speak up and be like,
Yeah,
oh,
there's certain
now you're labeled as a whiner, and, like, kind of a rat or whatever. So, like, people are generally not going to do that. But I like to remind people that it is an option. You could do that. And if you did, you could be in the right. I haven't done a podcast in a while, but we have this Beyond the X and O's podcast where we would, I was like, hey, come on our Beyond the X and O's podcast and let's like, we'll air it out. Like, well,
there
like,
you go.
I was like, well, we'll give you a platform to tell your story. But I'm joking around with that a little bit, but just in the essence of, like, it is a choice. And because sometimes that is the option to go. And there is things like, we're actually doing a pilot program with the GTHL to start assessing and developing coaches on Beyond the X's and O's, just to proactively support
Awesome.
coaches more. So, like I think the trend on the coaching level is actually going in the right direction. Still lots of ways to go, but at least it's going in the right direction. But it's also then, contrasted against the people, meaning more so the players and the coaches in our society are like, more than ever, we realize how inappropriate the toxic behaviors are. So in some ways, it
Hmm.
looks worse than ever before, but in other ways, it's way better than it was probably 5, 10 years ago. So like, let alone 20. So it's going in the right direction. But then the awareness on the parents and the athletes, like, this is wrong. So then they're even more upset. Whereas 10 years ago, someone did
Yeah.
that, they're like, oh, that's just coaching. Like, which didn't make it
Well,
right, but like,
I,
the
I,
ripple effect.
I
So
would hear all the time from people go, oh, I go, geez, your coach is a little volatile. And they're like, yeah, he swears a bunch, but he gets good results. And I'm like, they're eight. What are we talking about here? Right. So it's just like, come on. And I'm going to, I'm going to put the explicit, come on, you fucker, skate harder. And you're like, okay, now I got to put the explicit
yeah,
wording on that for dropping an F bomb. But,
yeah,
I would just shake my head and I go, 16 maybe,
yeah,
8 probably not,
yeah,
like it's just like where you want to be. And I
yeah,
think, going back to what you said, they have a choice, but I think sometimes, like
yeah.
there's a fear of retribution. And
Oh, huge.
I've
Yeah,
talked to parents, as well about things, and they're like, oh, they're really afraid to talk to their coach about this, or they're afraid to talk, and they don't want us to bring it up. And
yeah,
I don't recommend when you're an older athlete, a teen athlete, I think
yeah,
they should be doing the talking to the coach. I
yeah,
don't think parents, you should be
yeah,
really, unless it's really out of control, something's out of
yeah,
control. But I think
yeah,
the kid should always have some ownership in that. And that helps them grow as a person too, and speaking to people. But
yeah,
I think, my comment to somebody the other day when they said, oh, my son's really afraid. I said, well, that tells me you might not be in the right place.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
If you,
Yeah, and just to jump in, my second point. So one is like speak up either to the coaches or organization or whatever seems appropriate, and know that you're in the right, and I'll use right in quotes, but like you're within your right and within an area of like, hey, toxic coaching is not okay, and there's a better way. The other now option is like, well, you don't have to play. You don't have to play there. Like sport's a choice. Like no one's handcuffing you into playing sport. Like you choose to play, and coaches aren't going to be perfect, but doesn't mean you like have to tolerate it. Like we get what we tolerate. And often in the past, like you said, like, oh, but he gets results. And we would tolerate all this toxic coaching, which is partially why it's become very, pervasive and kind of ingrained in the culture. And there's a bunch of other factors. But so my point being like, Ryan, like you could quit or you could change teams or like just leave, like if you can't deal with it. And so, and you're well and you're right. So it's just making a safe place for people to understand the range of options versus just either deal with it or don't. Like, so like almost too like, that. And then, so those are like two more out there options that, again, I don't think people are going to choose, but for them to be aware of and understand, like, it's okay to choose that. Like,
sure,
um, and then it's like, okay, well, if you're gonna stay and stick it out, well, how do you want to do it? And you could do some self advocacy or just go ask the coach for more clarity because maybe you don't understand something. Because often it's just a communication problem. Is kind of like it's not as toxic, but it's like feels toxic because you're just not getting the feedback. And so those could be some other middle options. But then it's just like, well, are you going to filter it and process it and not let it weigh on you? It's like, oh, the coach is taking away my confidence. Says who? You're saying like you're playing now the victim,
sure.
and you're letting the situation like, oh, my hand, I have nothing I can do with this. If you want to take that approach, go ahead. Like it's going to hurt you more than anything. Like it's not fun. Like so we have this awareness and choice now when we're in a tough situation, whether that be coaching related or just anything else in life. Playing elite sport is inherently tough. You're going to fail. You don't want it. You can be like, oh, it'll bring you down, and you can quit, or you can be like, all right, let me make the most out of this. Let me focus on how I can filter that, take the message, focus on what I can control. Who do I want to be, despite all of this going on around me? And so, a couple good, funny, different examples. One I use on the extreme end, the toxic end, is the hazmat suit example. So I've had a couple athletes where it's like, and this
Right.
is an alter ego example, where it's like, put your hazmat suit on because you're going into Chernobyl and it is toxic. And like, but you're going to be fine because you've got your hazmat suit on. So we are filtering at a very like, high level there of a lot of toxicity. The other example that I like to use in contrast to a hazmat suit is more along the lines of just like you're going in and you want to prioritize like who do you want to be and how do you want to respond to these situations. And it's like, hey, my opinion matters most. Yes, my coach's opinions matter, my parents' opinions, my teammates, but I'm not going to let all that stuff bring me down. I'm going to actually use it and use the challenge to fuel me to like focus on who I want to be. And so we can actually use the adversity as a source of grit and a source of like double down and buy-in and these different things. So, and one of the examples there is from Brian Johnson's bonfire candle, which is like you get a bunch of wind. That's like the adversity and the challenge. Well, if you're a candle, you start to flicker. But if you're a bonfire, if you're a really big bonfire, you use it. If you feel like you're flickering, well, just be a bigger bonfire and then you use it as fuel. And so it's like, how strong is your fire? So these are just a couple different ways of processing, who do you want to be given, the situation that you're in.
Yeah, it's totally fair. And I think it's interesting of you saying, hey, like, oh, the coach is this and shrinking away from things. I mean, I know especially in hockey, if you're rising to the junior hockey ranks, these kids are we're all the best player on their team.
Mm-hmm.
And now some of them have to take on different roles. It doesn't mean they have to accept that role, but if they want to figure out a way to play, they've got to figure out a way to be valuable. No coach in any sport at any, especially at a high level, doesn't play guys if he doesn't think they can win. Like
Yeah.
he's going to play you if you give him a chance to
Yeah.
win. But there was an example in the book where you talked about a player who worked, I think, with one of your colleagues,
Yeah.
and the coach basically called him a role player, and you're a role player, and the kid
Yeah.
refused to accept it
Yeah.
and went out to be the guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that actually catapulted him to like great success,
Yeah.
right?
No,
So
exactly.
I think
Example. Yeah.
I think that's important. Like just just because somebody tells you that's who you are, you don't have to be that way. I think that's
Yeah.
great. That's great advice. If you
Yeah.
believe different and
Yeah.
put it into action, right? So
Yeah. No, 100%. A lot of players like they start to believe they're a third liner or a fourth liner, even though like, because what's the difference between a third and fourth liner skill and the first liner? Sometimes it's not that much. It's just the performance
no,
of late or the situation they're in or the bias of the coach. But then all of a sudden they're in that position, they start to believe it and they play that way. I remember when I was one of my years in the OHL, I was like, I started to really identify as a third liner, kill penalties, get pucks deep, like, not playing with a lot of, confidence and poise. But I'd, chip away, get at some points here and there and some goals. But then every once in a while I get up on the top six and I'd be playing like, and I get some more opportunity, but like, I just kept playing like a third liner. So I never stayed I just had that, like, just get rid of it kind of almost mentality to a degree. It also didn't help. Here's a funny story. The one of the games I got called up was against London, and Patrick Kane, we were like line matched against, and he got a hat trick and got the best of me. So that's I got sent back down the next game after that.
I I don't know. I think he's got the best of a lot of people in
Yeah,
his career. Oh, Patty Kane.
I was one of his victims in a way. So not that I'm a victim, but he got the best of me.
Oh, there
That's
you
for
go.
sure. So one of them. So
I grew up with a guy I was a goalie and he was a goalie and he's a little bit older and he played in a tournament against Wayne Gretzky and was victimized many times. Um, I just saw something the other day. I was trying to explain. I don't even know if my wife understood it. It was like when he was 11 years old. I think he had like 587 points in 85 games. Like just
Mhm.
ridiculous. When you think about that, like anybody who played against him must have just been standing there with their mouth open, trying to
Oh
figure
yeah,
out how
yeah,
he did what he did, just on another level talent.
yeah,
So in your book, Mindset First, one of the things that intrigued me was this 100 reasons why you are great
yeah,
exercise. So can you maybe explain that in a little bit more detail? I mean, it seems to me like a way of journaling
yeah.
is my guess, because a lot of people talk about journaling, but it's like, okay, well, what do I write in my journal? And this, at
Yeah.
least to me, goes, oh, here's something specific that you could do. So maybe explain that in greater detail and how you think that helps kind of build a little bit more resilient mindset.
So yeah, the the root of it is around, yeah, resilience and confidence and just like owning your capabilities. Because, and just to elaborate, I alluded to it earlier, the major mistake with confidence and that word is people associate it with results. So when I'm getting confidence and praise, like, or I'm getting results and praise, I'm confident. And when I'm not, I'm losing my yo-yo confidence. So I
Sure.
actually want athletes to stop using that word because to me, it's tainted. It's too associated with external things. Whereas capabilities is based on the work you put in. You put in work, you earn your capability. That's a stable trait. It doesn't really change day to day. And over time, you keep putting in the work, your capabilities goes up a bit. Now, you can
Yep.
well underperform your capabilities if you're doubting yourself and you're not owning it. But like, so now instead of like, hey, do I have a confidence problem? It's no, am I owning my capabilities? Oh, I'm not owning my capabilities. Okay, well, not like, well, why not? I'm being too hard on myself. I'm focusing too much on results and all these excuses. So it's like, okay, your job's just to own your capabilities, not go be confident. So then with that, it's like, well, how do we train our mind to consistently own our capabilities? So one of the things we do is we actually want people to talk about journaling and from a daily, write your wins down every day. Just your general, like, hey, what went well? What does I get better at? What am I learning? Like that's just builds momentum because most high performers are doing what? How do I be better? How do I be better? What's not good enough? And they kind of downplay their successes. So, and when you do that over time, you become a negatively skewed self-image, which is
Mm.
clearly problematic. You can be highly motivated and you get better, and you get better because you're focusing on what you're getting better. But then your confidence is more negatively skewed. Your self-image and how you see yourself is negatively skewed. So I don't want it to be overly positively skewed, being like, yeah, downplay what you got to get better and over exaggerate what you're good at. Like, no, we want an accurate self-image where we own all of our capabilities. So now this exercise goes deeper and like, hey, we're going to go into the past. We're going to go into the past. Could take a week or two. It's going to take an hour to 2 hours to do this exercise. And you're going to go through and list specific things, not vague. I'm smart. I'm fast. That's specific. Anybody can say that. Compared to what? Write down what you've done, the work you put in, the progress you have made, things you have learned and developed. I was this fast. Now I'm going this speed. And the achievements as well. We will put results in there because they matter and or things people have said. But put all the categories, starting with like who you were being and what you were doing the effort you put in, the things you've learned and developed, and then the results that you've achieved. And you can do this more than just sport, and you shouldn't be 100 things in just one sport. That'd be crazy. And then your self-image becomes what? It's tied to just your sport.
Tied to your
So
sport. I was just going to say, I mean, you're probably, if you're a teenager going to high school, what are the wins you had that day? Did you not get in trouble? Or did
yeah,
you
exactly. Yeah.
stay off your phone for a whole period or whatever that is, right?
Yeah.
You know?
So then as they go through this, what happens and why again we're doing it is like they'll get like 10 or 20 and they'll be like, I can't think of anything. I'm like, great. This is our opportunity to reinforce we can own our wins. And like there's still reasons there versus like, well, I've got a couple things I did well today. I can't think of anything. Like that's people's default. Like it's like only the big things.
Sure.
Well, scored a hat trick, had a good day. Like scored, that means it was successful. Otherwise, no success. Like, and so, and like I get pro athletes to do this, and it's very impactful for them, let alone, up and coming athletes and youth athletes, because the quicker they learn to own their capabilities and be able to have that as a narrative that they can now tap into, it's just a healthy thing for life. How many people are just so worried about what everyone thinks, so beating themselves up all the time, and so hard on themselves, and like over focus on the negatives. And again, we're wired that way naturally because it's a survival mechanism.
100%.
We got to know where
Yeah.
the screw ups are so we don't die. That's not what we're talking about. Like, and we'll never lose that wiring because it keeps us alive. It's like, oh, I put my hand on the stove, hot. Remember that. That was a screw up. Don't do that again. Like, so I could burn my house. Like, we're not going to lose that. How do we want to live though? Do we want to live in a fear-based don't screw up, or we want to live maximizing our impact, thriving, and building momentum for ourselves in different areas of life? Well, doing that
Sure.
is about owning the things and building momentum and the internal narrative we tell, right? It's a good line. The most important story you'll ever read or you'll ever tell is the one you tell yourself, right? And so then we're rewriting and writing the story and the narrative that we have. And so there's a lot of wiring that kind of goes into that. And it's a very, as you burst through those, I can't think of anything. And then you get to like 40, like, oh, there's definitely nothing now. And then you go and find some and like you let them come out. Like you've already done them. If you've done 10 things well per year for the last 10 years, that's 100. Right. I remember I did this. My uncle
Sure.
was the one who passed this exercise on for me. It's an iteration from some of John DeMartini's work. And I didn't do this till like I was done school and starting this business and this work. I remember people be going like, well, what if it doesn't work out? What if you don't get a career in this? I was like, damn, what if it doesn't work out? Like I was like feeding the, I was like, oh no, why am I doing this? Like, what, I don't know. And then eventually I made like the assertion is like, it's not a matter of if it works out. It's more of a matter of when. Like I'm committed to it. And then, but also just to own my own capabilities. My uncle, helped me, Uncle Tom Preston helped me do this exercise. I was like, I wrote down 100. And then I think like 6 months later and some more doubt or something creeped. I was like, I'm doing another 50. I was like, let me go on some more. And I consistently still do it in my own life and work where we write down our wins daily, especially weekly. And we compile them. Like Todd Herman uses the analogy of like, it says like a stack of chips in life, like at a poker table. If you're at a poker table
Right.
and you've got
Stack
a
them up.
massive stack, you're like, I'm ready to play poker. You got the small stack, you're like, I don't know. Like the poker becomes a lot harder. But when you got the most chips on the table, like, and so every day, every week, every month, like we're just piling up our wins. And like
Yeah.
doesn't mean we're ignoring the things to get on. We're naturally going to do that anyways. Don't ever downplay that. You can do
Yeah.
both. You can stack your chips
I can.
and still grow. So that's the
I think I
exercise.
have to do that. I think I have to do this exercise.
Yeah.
I can tell you even like in starting this podcast, right?
Mhm.
I think you go, okay, is anybody going to listen to this? And it's funny. I just started watching a show on plug for Netflix if you want to sponsor
Yeah.
Bodkin. It's a
Yeah.
kind of quirky drama comedy,
Yeah.
and they're podcasters and they're in Ireland, and every person they meet in the small town goes, "Oh, it's a podcast, is it? People listen to that?" And that's kind of the way I was like, and I'm laughing my tail off because that's what I'm thinking. I go, people are going to listen to this? Are they
Yeah.
actually going to listen to this?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's totally random, and I think it is probably a good idea to try to stack some chips to
Yeah.
make things
Yeah.
going forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I this is the segment of the show where I like to get into rapid fire questions. So we'll get started. What is one book you would recommend everyone to read?
Well, I gotta go mindset first. But if it can't be my own book,
It can be. I was actually going to throw you. It could be your own book. Yeah.
yeah, it can be your own book. The other fundamental one I like is the inner game of tennis, which is much more than tennis. Just like my book's much more than hockey. It's from 1985. Timothy Galloway. It's a good foundational sports psych book as well.
Cool. All right. That's awesome. And what is one thing a listener can do right now to make a difference in their journey towards being a little bit more mindful and have a little bit more bulletproof mindset?
My number one thing is I should make this note here because I got a couple things I want to say after. But the around one of the other questions. But the number one thing I say is like focus on not the question of like what do I want to achieve, which is results first, but who do I want to be? How do I want to show up, which is mindset first. Or the other language is outside in. Oh, don't what not to do. How does the external world dictate how I feel? Living outside in versus what do I want to achieve? And the priority is external first. Flip your priorities to who do you want to be and how do you want to show up, which is inside, get clarity, and then go tackle the outside world. Out or inside now,
Gotcha.
out. Mindset first. So that's the one. If people just start doing that, they're inherently becoming more mindful and intentional, and things will flow. Now you got to get clarity on who you want to be and to go do the other work and understand acceptance, commitment, and there's other things. But that's the foundational thing. Because even if we do all the other stuff, if someone gets this wrong and they start going outside in again, everything falls apart. So, and that's what we're constantly working on in a lot of different ways. So, yeah, that'd be my
Gotcha.
main tip.
Perfect. What is some advice you would pass along to teenage you after reading the book? I think you probably have some.
Yeah, yeah, a lot. I think the main one, it was probably what I just said around um, prioritize who I want to be and how I want to show up, which stays connected to the love of the game versus, and I can still have the goals, but I don't make it my main thing. I was so obsessed and just focusing on my points and my stats and comparing to others and like living very outside in. and I oscillated a bit, but didn't know what I was doing. Like, it was like in this foundational thing. Like, we even just saw it, to a degree. I would say, Rory, that just missed 2 3-foot putts. I don't know if you saw this yesterday.
I
Again, Bryson
I I
DeChambeau.
had a
Yeah, like, and
yes,
he's got a great mental game for sure. In those moments, he started to go outside in. He's like, I might get my Masters win. It's like, and if that flips, things start to fall apart. And so, but having the clarity of this foundational thing, oh, like, and like, I'm not like, it's not like I learned it 10 years. Like, it took me 20 years to figure this out. And I'm like going back.
sure.
And that's why I wrote the book and these things. So it's like, so that would be the main thing, is like flip my approach to life from inside out, mindset first, like make the priority who I'm being, not what I'm trying to achieve. And the mistake is,
Gotcha.
okay, well, I want to go be this and focus on my mindset so that I get results. Still being results
Yeah,
first. Like, it's like,
sure.
no, actually prioritize this, and you have to intentionally do it day in and day out. So that's kind of that'd be the main thing. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And the Rory thing, I'd actually was looking it up this morning. I was like, I wonder who his mental performance coach is and whether his stock has dropped or whether, it's obviously the
I think it's
athlete. But
Robert
I was just
Sala.
like, yeah, I know. I was like going like, okay. So I'm sure they had a conversation. I
Yeah,
think the craziest part for me
yeah,
was, well, I had saw he was leading
yeah,
and we were going out for dinner.
yeah,
And I got to the restaurant and there happened to be a TV up there. And I was like, DeChambeau won? And I didn't know what happened
yeah.
at that moment. And then I go back to watch and I was like, oh my
No.
God.
Yeah.
No, that couldn't have happened. Right. And I was like, but I get what you mean because he's been one of the great talents of the game. He's been the spokesperson for the PGA versus Live,
Yeah.
all these things, and he hasn't won a major in a decade.
Yeah.
He's going through a lot of personal strife in his life with his marriage.
Yeah.
And you're right there. He's probably thinking, okay, I just tap this in. We're good. And
Yeah.
then,
Yeah. But he's
I did it. I
that's
did
it.
it.
You go up to
Yeah.
a putt and you're like, okay, I'm gonna get the result here. I tap this in. I'm about to win a major. You're way more likely now to miss that putt. And I would guess he
Yeah.
probably wasn't thinking exactly like that, but that starts to
No.
linger. And then that can just throw off his process just ever so much. And those weren't easy putts, just to be clear, especially the last one. Like, that was, he was way outside the hole sliding in. Like, it's
Yeah.
easier for him. Me and you were missing that putt 8 out of 10 times, but like, or at least
Maybe
I'll speak
12
for
out of 10.
myself. I'll speak for myself. I'll probably miss it 8 out of 10. But then they're going to usually make that 9 out of 10 times, would be my guess. Like,
Oh,
maybe even 10 out
well,
of
his
10,
stat,
maybe 9 out of
he,
100. So
yeah,
um,
his stats. So we go down this
yeah,
rat hole. I think they were saying he made 46 of the last 46 putts inside
yeah,
that distance. Like,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, he's like lights out.
yeah.
It's so
So
it's so
that's a
interesting.
mental mistake. It's a mental mistake,
Yeah,
to a degree, and the foundation was he probably got the fantasy of winning the master started to take up space in his head, and that became the priority in those moments to a degree, and he didn't
it's
collapse
possible.
the fantasy and didn't. I'm quite certain around it because I've got some other pro golfers, and we're like, when they do that, when they detach from the range of results and what could happen, and now they can commit back to the thing.
To the,
um,
yeah,
yeah, to the
fair enough. I
process.
guess we'll never know because he booked it. He was
Yeah,
on his plane 58 minutes after after he missed the putt. So I
yeah.
mean, and you know what? Honestly, I kind of feel like I don't even want to bust Rory's chops about that
Oh,
because I think if it
oh
was
yeah.
me, I would have done the same thing. I would have been
Oh yeah.
so pissed
Yeah.
off at myself. I would have been gone. See ya.
No,
I
and
don't want
he
to talk
still
to you
had
guys.
great mental fortitude, like some of the other shots, and like, Bryson made a huge, par save on 18 too. Like, there's all kinds of different ways. So it's not like it was a massive mental mistake collapse. It was little ones that were a difference in those,
Yeah,
things, and so his mental game is obviously still very strong. It's just we're human. We all make mental mistakes. Bryson made
sure.
some. Bryson couldn't hit a fairway to save his life from most of
No.
the things. So, like, are those
Uh,
mental mistakes? Partially, like, to some degree, like, they're
well,
all
and
making mental mistakes to some degree.
I would argue he misses a short putt on 9,
Yeah,
and that's the difference, right? That nobody cares, nobody really notices it as
yeah,
much. It's just been so magnified
yeah,
by where they were right
yeah,
there, right?
yeah,
So I think
yeah,
that because it's a golf tournament is it's a book of work. It's
Yeah.
over 4 days, and it's like one or two shots on whatever day could cost you. It just so happened it was absolute giant magnifying glass. So, anyways,
Giant magnifying. Yeah.
unfortunate for him.
Yeah.
Um, so I'll finish with my last question is, well, actually second last. Best piece of advice you ever received and who gave it to you?
Best piece of advice. Ooh. Um, I'd probably go. Well, Todd's given me tons of great advice. Todd Herman. One of the ones was just around like, I'll give two. One's, I use the line, "Don't do dumb shit." It's just like, it's just like we get caught up in life, like we just want so many things, right, outside in, and then we're just like chasing everything, and it's like, no, no, you have your like less is more, if that makes sense. It's like
Yeah.
simplify, like be clear on what you want to do and how you want to show up, and be like, so getting more clarity versus being, so it's like, don't start chasing different things and getting caught up in distractions. Be clear. And then the other flip side of that was also just ties into the stack of chips. It's like, a lot of people are like, oh, do I deserve these things? Do I deserve to succeed? Am I worthy? And like, I love this line. It's like,
Mm.
if you made a good investment, um, like you picked the stock and then it came, a bunch of money back, would you be like, do I deserve it? You'd be like, yeah, I made the investment. Like, that's like, you get it, you earned it. Like, so it's like the same for like athletes or business or anything else. It's like, you make, the decisions and put in the work, and then you reap the benefits. Like, you've earned that. Like, you don't want to be elated by it, making money or, getting fame or win the Stanley Cup. Like, winning the Masters is not a fantasy. There's, pressure and expectations and weight that comes with that. It's a goal and outcome. And you earned it. Great. If you don't, just feedback, keep adapting and go along the way. But making sure not to get caught up in this "am I worthy" trap was another kind of interesting one that I could probably break down for 5 to 10 minutes, but for the short of
There
it,
you
I'll
go.
leave it
Fair,
at that.
fair enough. Now you did say you made a note because you wanted to add to an
Yeah.
answer of an earlier question. What was that?
Yeah, one of the other ones, and we talked about relentless, and it was also with the coaching situation, was the idea of, we talked about the um, hazmat suit. Another one, I really like the words
Sure.
unfazed relentlessness. So it's like, because a lot of people are relentless, but they're rattled. Like, you know what I mean? They're phased. It's like, I want to be unfazed and relentless, and I like using like the Terminator, right? For the people who know what the Terminator is, like the robot
Yeah.
hunting down their target, and they're just like, they're getting shot. It's like, doesn't matter. Like, they're just, doesn't matter. Like, unfazed, just relentless, attacking the task at hand. So it's just a good another analogy that I meant to share earlier. So,
Well, that's great. So last question is, if you could choose one guest for a future episode on this podcast, who would that be?
Well, if you can get Todd on, that'd be great. It'll be a challenge. um, I might even be able to get you. One of my guys is in the Stanley Cup. He may be up for doing it. Connor Brown. So I
Great.
worked with him this past year. He's gone public that getting over that scoring slump that he was in this year. Like, had a real tough year, so it was really good. Shifted his mindset, so he'd be a
Yeah,
he
that
eats the stuff up. So he's been applying it,
we'll
and he's been great.
we'll manifest that right now.
Yeah,
It is definitely something, I've been working with. A lot of the episodes are with coaches, and there will be a shift to athletes as well. Just because, getting their perspective. Because I always think even just about like, how does, especially when you're younger, how do you buy into this, right? And even older people, they're stuck in their ways, and
mm-hmm.
how do they open themselves up to something that seems a little woo woo, a
Mm-hmm.
little, new age or whatever. Oh, I got to get in touch with my feelings, and you know, I got to chant and all these other weird things they think it is, right?
Yeah,
And really, it is just trying to put yourself in the best, I think, the best mental state. And it's not just, like I look at this as just not for sports either. I mean, in your daily life,
yeah,
I think if you're a student, you're going to school, you might have a toxic teacher,
yeah,
as opposed to a toxic coach. And how do you show up every
yeah,
day there intentionally? I talk to my kids about it all the time. Oh, my teacher sucks. And I go, yeah. And one day you'll have a boss that sucks. And so how can you find a way to give them what they want
Hmm.
So they suck less or they get off your ass or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Maybe you're part of the problem because of
Yeah.
how you're approaching it, right? So how can, not everything's a life lesson, Dad. Well, I think it maybe is sometimes.
Yeah.
So it is
100%.
what it is. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. Appreciate the time, Cassidy. It's been a great discussion. I could talk for hours more. But
Yeah.
anyways, I want to wrap up and I want to thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe to wherever you find your podcasts. Thanks a
Thank you
lot.
so much for having me, Todd. Thank you.
My pleasure.